Hey, so good morning. I'm Chris Booth. I'm the co-director of the Irregular Warfare Initiative's Maritime program. I want to thank the Naval War College, the foundation, and particularly Colonel Brown for inviting us, and Abby for all the work that she was doing behind the scenes in making this happen. We have the probably unenviable opportunity to be the last panel of the day, but hopefully it's one that you guys will appreciate. Wanted to point out IWI, we've talked about it, it's come up some in some of the other panels, but really our goal is to bridge the gap between scholars and practitioners to support the community of irregular warfare professionals. And we do that right now through a podcast that has about 1.5 million downloads. We publish about 300 articles a year. We're recording this right now, and our hope is to have it up on our website so that today's discussion can also reach a broader audience. To just touch on what Colonel Maxwell and John Pennell were talking about earlier, we welcome submissions, and there are a lot of things out there that people could be writing about. And so as the co-director of the Maritime program, I'm probably the point of contact, and so I recognize that I may be inundated with submissions, but we would be happy to have that. We want to point out, of course, that the opinions expressed by the panelists are not that of the Department of War, IWI, or any U.S. government, but everyone is here to speak on their own behalf. So to start, I'm going to go ahead and ask the panelists here to speak for about 5 minutes to provide the audience with a brief snapshot of their background and discuss their experience with autonomous maritime vessels. So I will start.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting. I'm Ivan, Officer of Security Service of Ukraine, Commander of Maritime Unit. In our area of responsibility, my area of responsibility, assets, operations, everything related to maritime domain. Right now, we are mostly focused on Black Sea. Hope together with our partners and alliance will increase our boundaries some days. Instead of numbers of words, it's better to see what we already done. I prepared some small video. Can we please turn it on?
Мій маленький човен хвилями гойдає, пам'ять день і ніч. Човен спогадами повен, з нього добре видно землю на всю біч. Там зліва і справа, схід
Yeah, for sure. In this video, just a small piece of everything we are doing on daily basis. And I'm happy to share all our experience, but unfortunately, 1 hour is not enough. We'll highlight the most important topics, and for sure, I'm pretty happy to be here, and I was really surprised that most of discussions last days pretty common for us, and I'm really enjoyable to be here, and want to say thank you one more time for United States government, for you guys for supporting Ukraine and stand with Ukraine.
I think Ivan's obviously an unassuming guy, but anyone who's serving on active duty in the Navy probably wants to keep him on your side. And Michael, you have the unenviable position of following that. So.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Stewart, and when I found out Ivan was going to be on this panel, I thought, that's awesome. That's like having me sit with Messi to talk about soccer, or maybe for me, Michael Jordan on the panel talking about the finer points of basketball. But anyway, my background, I was a naval officer, did a bunch of different things, got out and went in business, but then found myself in 2019 working for Admiral Jim Kilby. And then in 2021, Admiral Gilday and Admiral Lesher, who was the vice chief, came up and said, number one, we don't have a particularly compelling story with Unmanned. We're trying to figure out what to do with it. And Admiral Lesher was thinking in response to combatant commanders who were not moving quickly enough. So that created something called the Unmanned Task Force, which I was in charge of, which was basically, can you move inside 2027 to deter or defeat China on the Taiwan invasion was really sort of the purpose. We were noticing that things like MUSV, LUSV, and XLUUV were not delivering in time, so can you go faster? At the same time, Admiral Brad Cooper called me up and said, we're thinking about some unmanned stuff when he was NAVCENT, flew me out, and then we designed Task Force 59 with my friend Michael Brasser that you probably saw in the news the other day, and we can go through that story. And then those efforts were deemed successful, and then we created the Disruptive Capabilities Office, and then created the Navy Rapid Capabilities Office. Out of some of the stuff we were doing with Admiral Paparo, that became Hellscape, that became Replicator, and then if you notice, Replicator 1 was basically all Navy, and they had a couple other services, but essentially those efforts, which were really irregular, how to move quickly, things like kinetic USVs, things like loitering munitions, how do you deter, defeat China inside the weapons engagement zone? And so I retired last year, and now I'm advising, but that's why I'm here. I can tell you kind of the story of how the Navy was transitioning to actually make this an accepted part of warfare.
And Austin, if you can speak to us from kind of the startup side of things.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me and this group here, and thanks to Dave and Abby for everything you've done to set this up. So I'm very conscious that this is the last intro of the last panel, so it's either a compliment, because I think we can keep the room, or it's like, hey, you guys go last. The room will be half filled. So I'm here as one of the founders of a company called Blue Water Autonomy. We build autonomous ships for the Navy, for commercial fleets. We view ourselves in a way where we want to be the Waymo of the open ocean. We're one of the first Google-backed defense companies, which is very exciting. And if I step back, if Blue Water is known for something or remembered or even exists a decade from now, I think it'll be one thing. And that's that we will have connected the old industrial base, right, shipbuilding and the existing suppliers and the shipyards, to the new industrial base, right, to drones and software and the technology system, and connected those two things with the Navy and the customer, because I think the customer doesn't fully understand how to buy necessarily either of those things. The Navy has a terrible track record of buying ships, maybe even a worse track record of buying software, and we need to figure out how to fuse them together. As an example of that, like, who here has operated a drone? Anyone? Okay, so solid, almost, maybe there's 20% of the room, but who here's been on a boat or ship? A lot of the room, right? And probably many people have operated some sort of smaller boat. So that to me is an example of, I think, some of the comfort levels. You know, that lead to phase change once people have touched and been exposed to and help shape the capabilities and the platforms and the tech that we have. The idea for Blue Water came from my time in Ukraine working in a drone factory. I was very lucky to spend a summer in a Kyiv suburb and then on the front lines in the Donbass a little bit, working with soldiers and engineers. And my takeaway was that the small drones that are effective, especially in the maritime space in Ukraine, are amazing. The Ukrainians have been pushing recently for a lot more range, right? Of the ability to hit deeper and deeper into Russia because they have a large adversary. At the time, the Black Sea USVs would be useful in the Taiwan Strait, but not really useful in the open Pacific. And so Blue Water started as that thesis of everything they're doing is perfect for that battlefield. Let's build something that's perfect for the Pacific. And so that is a ship-sized unmanned surface vessel. We don't do speedboats, we don't do sailboats, we do ship-sized vessels, and we started with highly reliable autonomous engine rooms at the megawatt scale for autonomous ships. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. All right, my first question, I'd like you to share your thoughts on how the use of maritime drones has evolved in Ukraine in your fight against the Russian Black Sea Fleet from the sinking of the Moskva in 2022 to now. And then I think the audience would also like to hear from you on what you see in the near-term future if the war continues over the next year or two.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I want to start from why everything happens, why Ukraine start to use maritime drones. It's not because of strategic, it's because lack of Navy. Security service, just to audience little bit be aware what is a security service. It's something like FBI in the United States, so our duty is completely different. But war is something nobody can be ready for. That's why on the beginning all powers should be focused to defeat enemy and protect our country. That days Ukrainian Navy leftovers, I would say leftovers, couple of patrol boats, completely locked down in Odessa ports. There are no proper answers, and day to day we received notice that Russians will do land operations. Next day, day after the day, something similar. And operation against Moscow warship was so huge and powerful and help a little bit make a free room for Ukraine in western part of Black Sea. But after that, all Ukrainian capabilities was limited. We have tens of anti-warship missiles, something in the stock donated by partners. If we do a retrospective for that days, most of modern world was so limited to provide modern weaponry to Ukraine because nobody be sure that this weaponry would be captured by Russians. That it means that we are asking for cruising missiles, receive rifles. It brings Ukraine and Ukraine engineers to a challenge. What we cannot do. Inside Ukraine, we have a term called wedding drones. It's a regular Mavic DJI Mavic drones, which used on the front line for multiple purpose. First of all, ISR missions. After that, do bombers, drops, kamikaze, whatever else. The same idea becomes to maritime domain. And on the beginning, idea was simple: get any boat, put some amount of explosion, connect Starlink, and do remote operation. That's how initial USV start develops. I wouldn't say that USV even nowadays is autonomous system. It's more about unmanned. From different perspective, first of all, legal, right for kill available only for humans. That's why final decision always on shoulders of operator and his commander. Second one, technological restrictions still. Rapidly develops of EW system, other kind of resistance, so rapid. It means that still human in the loop, pretty important. But for sure, we continue development to minimize human involvement, to minimize human factor. But especially one of major operation with USV being in Sevastopol naval base was a major naval base by Russians and captured Crimea. And to be honest, that operation was unsuccessful in one reason. We received notice from our partners that we are not able to do it because everybody that days was so scared about nuclear attack or something like that. It was not fun, but nowadays a little bit ironical for us. It's 2026, still no nuclear attacks by Russians. And after that, we decided to do more aggressive way. That's how successful attack against frigates, Admiral Makarov and Tesson was happened. After that, next mission was Crimea Bridge, pretty successful mine lane and a bunch of other operations. Most of other units also joined to this game. Nowadays, I guess 5 or 6 military and paramilitary units involved into USV operations in the Black Sea. And it brings USV development for new level. Nowadays, we can see so big variants of USV starting from kamikaze for sure, ended up with air defense system using missiles, interceptors, whatever else. All around, all the actions bring take over the Russians in the western part of Black Sea and push them pretty far away to their backup station, Novorossiysk naval base. And again, it put us into a new challenge: how to get them at their home base, completely protective, far away from our launch sites, distance 800 nautical miles, which are pretty huge distance for a small boats. It put us for challenges how to balance between payload, fuel, tactics of implementation. And some days it's all that situation put us in a cat-mouse game situation. When Russians do counteractions, we looking for new technology, new strategies and tactics to implement USV. And as a result, if do some summarize, nowadays 30% of Russian fleet completely disabled. Russian fleet, or let's say flotilla, nowadays sitting completely closed up in Novorossiysk naval base with a huge amount of defense layers, starting from floating buoys, underwater nets, sensors, patrol boats, a lot of them. And thankfully for our brothers from aerial units, Russians still not in a safe place, and their safety harbor not so safety. It means that the future of unmanned system, I wouldn't say right now about autonomous system because of different moral and legal perspective. I prefer to skip, but I have to follow on. Future of unmanned system pretty unpredictable, such as everything in Ukraine starting not from ideas, everything starting from from the needs. Interceptors pop-ups because we haven't enough manpad system. Deep strike drones comes because we have no cruising missile. And nowadays, Ukraine is the lead of unmanned system in aerial application, on surface application. Probably 2 months ago, I received a message from my friends from Frontline, which are involved into medevac operations, that nowadays it's pretty hard, such as a gray zone in the front line, not conventional, it's like 80 kilometers. It's pretty hard to supply guys on the front line, and almost impossible to recover them. There are only one way to do it, is use UGV, unmanned ground vehicles. And guys comes to me and said, you know a lot of people, you have experience, can you please support us and help us to improve our assets? We get our stuff a little bit away, help guys to build up the first UGVs they need. And nowadays, that UGV recover 25, I guess, soldiers from a front line with, which brings them back to the life. In terms of future of unmanned system, first of all, after the war, if we skip military operation, for sure, civilian purpose is pretty high. In countries where autonomous system not allows, unmanned system could be like middleware. For example, taxi could be driven by disabled guys who received some damages or veterans from different wars. It brings new work position, something like that. And in perspective of a war and our war with Russia, for sure Russia also developed a lot of unmanned system and autonomous system. They still limited in supply channels, but for sure they figure out how to avoid Europe sanctions, American sanctions. They still use technology they can receive by clever way. And one of our goals to minimize their logistics supply channels and logistic flows, do the most valuable impact against their infrastructure and economical sector.
And you didn't say it explicitly, but I just want to make sure I'm getting the point too. Like you and a lot of your team didn't start the war in the security service. I mean, you have like an entrepreneurial background, and so your personnel are learning on the.
Yes, we are. I would say all of my current team, it's around 200 people, involved officers. On the beginning, was completely civilian, no military background, no naval academies, nothing. We lived our lives, civilian lives. I found a couple of IT startups and did everything related to that. When I joined security service and start to do what we are doing right now, I faced that most of Ukrainian militaries have like traditional standards. They use their knowledge received by years in their university and through their service. And we faced like situation when I have idea and said, okay, let's do it this way. All support I receive from the militaries and navies, it's impossible. It's completely impossible. I start figure it out why it's impossible. Okay, I know how it's why impossible, but I have to find out the way how to do it. And in this like confrontations, we also always try to find out the way. And what's the most value for our team, because we are not limited by knowledges we have from military academies and military service. We just do what we believe to do, and somehow it still works.
Yeah, that's probably appropriate for a discussion on irregular warfare, that asymmetrically not having to follow the military's rules and traditions is giving you probably an advantage.
Yes, and when I saw that irregular warfare here, the main topic, I was start to do like retrospective in my head. Okay, does our activity is regular? For us, it's a regular activity. For rest of world, probably not. And I'm happy here to share at least some small information I can.
All right. So Michael, you may be in a position to have some of the best insight on how the U.S. Navy is adopting unmanned surface vessels and unmanned undersea vehicles. Can you talk about how the Navy is incorporating UUVs and USVs into the fleet, and what are some of the opportunities and challenges?
Sure. Can you pull up my slide, my first slide? So I want to cover some sort of overall themes and why did the Navy start thinking about this sort of stuff, and I'll piggyback a little bit on what you said, right? What I would say is the problem that we were having was, this was 2021, Admiral Paparo and Admiral Molino before him, if you look at the top left, that's the South China Sea, they were concerned that we were not responding fast enough inside 2027, right? So again, if you looked at the unmanned stuff the Navy was thinking about, it was going to deliver outside the 2027 window, the Davidson window. And so we had been getting a lot of attention, and the Navy had been getting some attention about just unconventional ways to deliver capability, right? And so we started looking at a bunch of the commercial technology and thinking about what could we do with it. Okay, so let me just bifurcate the way I think about that. So if you look at the South China Sea, what I didn't draw up there is a red line showing the weapons engagement zone. And you pick your favorite distance. Is it 1,000 miles a day? Is it 1,500 miles a day? Is it 2,300 miles, right? With the anti-ship ballistic missiles. And the Navy was spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to get inside that weapons engagement zone and deliver effects, right? And the Chinese, obviously, what they were doing is pushing as far away as we could. And so what we were trying to figure out is, how do can you get air and sea dominance inside the WES? And the conclusion was probably not fast enough to prevent that invasion, right? And so what we thought is, could we actually deny the use of that battle space? So again, imagine there's a red line, it's maybe 1,500 miles, right? What could we do inside that battle space and create something called a hellscape inside Taiwan, which basically you have 156 ships trying to launch an invasion. Could you use kinetic USVs? Full disclosure, we were working with some of the Ivan's guys, with USVs, kinetic USVs and stuff like that. Before the Russian invasion, we were sort of flirting with it, right? And I would agree with your comment. Guys were like, you don't want to play with those things because the genie's going to come out of the bottle and everybody will know. Well, the Houthis had already been doing it. But anyway, and so we were thinking about kinetic USVs, loitering munitions, all that sort of stuff to create a hellscape. And also with contested logistics, how would you resupply the Marines and stuff like that? On the outside of that weapons engagement zone is, you're thinking about what Austin's thinking about with his MUSV, is how do you help the fleet, right? So if you think about the outside the weapons engagement zone, what does the fleet and what does the battle group think about? Well, it thinks about adjunct missile batteries, it thinks about deception, it thinks about effects it can go with, right? Because you don't want to be in a situation where the war starts, you shoot all your missiles and you say to the Chinese, hey, hold on, we'll be back in 30 days after we rearm, so please, and so when I think about it, I think about inside the WES, which is, and I think Ivan, if you look at their experience, and, plus or minus, it used to be 10 miles, then 35 miles, now maybe 50 miles on the front line. If you're in there, you're going to get hit. You don't have exquisite assets inside there. You're going to get taken out, right? So how do you operate inside that? If I go to the top right, that's the Baltic, right? So the other thing I was doing was with NATO, the chairman of the NATO Naval Armaments Group, and so worked with the 32 countries. And I remember talking to a CNO of one of the Scandinavian countries, and they said to me, why do I care about what you guys are doing? And we said, well, I suspect you're really concerned about what Putin is going to do inside the Baltic, right? And when you're going back to your Navy, the Navy comes back and says, don't worry, we got you. Well, in 2035, we're going to have the most amazing ships, the most amazing submarines, the most amazing whatever. And it's like, no, I'm thinking about 6 months from now. and you're wondering if you could learn a page from the Ukrainians. And they laughed and said, you clearly have a bug in my office. And I said, don't worry, it's the bug that's in my CNO's office as well. And I said, so why don't you flip the script with what we did on Hellscape, right? Is instead of trying to get air and sea dominance, if you can shut down Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg, cut off their oil and cut off their ability to maneuver, and you could do that with kinetic USVs, you could do it with UUVs, you could do it with loitering munitions, you essentially shut down that maneuver space, right? And now with the Ukrainians having proved the theory, hopefully that deters the Russians, right? And then if you move down to the Saudi Arabia and the Fifth Fleet, this was what we were doing with Admiral Cooper. You got to remember what happened with Admiral Cooper. He shows up as the NAVCENT commander. We've pulled out of Iraq. We've pulled out of Afghanistan, and he's got two men and a boy in a rowboat to do maritime domain awareness. And so if the CENTCOM commander called him up and said, "Hey, Brad, what's going on in the Arabian Gulf?" I wish I knew. "Hey, Brad, could you tell me how the Houthis are being resupplied by out of Bandar Abbas?" So he had no ability to do maritime domain awareness. So he called me up, we went out, Michael Brasser was there, he'd just come from NATO, and the idea was, could we use commercial technology, just sail drones or USVs, stitch them together with mesh networks, pipe the information off through Starlink into an Amazon Snowball and start running AI. And this is all very theoretical, and Admiral Cooper is a great guy, and I think he was giving us a lot of leash. But I remember one day we were in Aqaba, Jordan, and I was in a mock, and imagine there's a screen over here, and there's 100 contacts, and there's a screen over here, and there's 100 contacts. On that side, there's 50 highly caffeinated Jordanians screaming and yelling, trying to make sense of that surface picture. Over here, we'd integrated 7 different sensors into one screen, and what was going on is you had one guy with a Starbucks with a latte dialing up and down the sensitivity of the AI, and then being able to say, of those 100 contacts, these are the 10 you care about. These are the 10 you care about, and oh, by the way, you missed these 15, and suddenly Admiral Cooper, with the paucity of assets, suddenly realized, okay, that's what you can do, and that's really what Task Force 59 was. It wasn't long before we started, watching what these guys are doing. It's like, look, you could start launching things off the USVs. You could be, if you think about a carrier battle group coming out of the Suez Canal towards the BAM, what are you doing with the Houthis? Those guys are taking long-range shots. Could you have picket ships out in front with the radar? Could you have shooters out in front of the carrier battle group so you don't have to waste exquisite assets? And then obviously I'm not going to, Ivan has forgotten more about the Black Sea than I will ever know. And so, we are watching what these guys are doing and realized and, would make the argument, because I'll tell you one quick story. Let me tell you, I went from the 9I, who is the ultimate insider, exactly what's, you sit on the surface, the surface guys, the sub guys, and the air guys, and so everything that's going on. The next day you become the unmanned guy. It's like, lock the door, keep that idiot out of the room, right? Because we don't want to talk to him.
You'll take their money, right?
You'll take their money. That's what the problem was, and we can have a whole discussion on disruption. Oh, by the way, one of my professors was Clayton Christensen, so if you know the Innovator's Dilemma, I lived that little story. And so what we were trying to do is figure out how to actually take this seriously, right? And I'll just cut to the chase. Watching these guys, we could say, look, I grew up as a naval officer. That was a Black Sea fleet. That was a really formidable fleet, and these guys took out that entire fleet with probably, I'd hate to think how little bit of money these guys were using, and you sidelined it, right? Well, so, anyway, I'll stop there. So with that analogy, so what is the Navy really thinking about? It's thinking about inside the WES, outside the WES, and I think the Navy, big Navy, is still trying to figure out what do we do with little USVs. I won't be surprised if that goes to the Marines and or the Army or the special operators, and then we think about outside the WES with MUSVs, LUSVs for platforms. But if you hear the CNO, he's still trying to figure out, I know that I want to do something with them. I haven't figured out what it is we need to do. But I think where we are right now is, okay, this is no longer crazy. There's utility. We just have to figure out what to do with them.
All right, so Austin, you kind of addressed the problems that you're seeking to solve with your company in your opening statement, but I'd like you maybe to envision the future, like a ideal case of future for the private sector and the Navy in this space, and then maybe realistically if those two things align or not.
Yeah, so I think I'll start by building on what Michael was just talking about, and then go into more about what I'm seeing, on the ground, trying to build a startup that can interface with the government and put ships and put capability into the Navy. And so to build on Michael's allegory of or not an allegory, it's a real scenario of the carrier coming through the Suez Canal and sailing down the Red Sea and running into some Houthis, right? And then trying to get to the mission probably over, closer to Iran or Afghanistan. So that was me in 2021. Everyone here probably remembers when the Suez got clogged by that ship that was sideways, right? So I was trying to go through it. We had to wait 2 weeks, and then we were the first ship to go through. We proved for the Egyptians that the strait was open for business with an aircraft carrier and a press release. And we went through the Red Sea, and we thought, we just seen this crazy thing with the Suez getting clogged. And then the Houthis popped up. And this was back when the Saudis and the Houthis were in a sort of an open war between them, but not with us. And what did we do? Well, we're on an aircraft carrier, right? We have all the U.S. intelligence community backing us up, looking for stuff with us. We have the Joint Force, air assets, but we don't really have any drones besides like an MQ-9, that's way far away over Yemen. And so we say, we'll send a helicopter to go look at that target. And that's basically how the Navy thinks is, I have this tool, how should I use it? And we had dinner last night as a group, and Ivan, you brought up the mindset with some Ukrainian operators who say, okay, I have Harpoon missiles, how should I use those missiles, right? Not what's my problem, and then how do I solve that problem with any tool that exists, not like the one tool I'm holding in my hand. And so I think, to answer your question, Chris, the big abstract change that has to happen, has to be permeated into the culture and the systems and the incentives and the budgets, is how do we solve the problem we're trying to solve, not how do I use the tool that I'm holding in my hand or that I have sitting in front of me. Because the tools we have are built for very specific things, and anyone who served in the military could bring up 1,000 examples of a time where a commander or a frontline soldier just jumped to, okay, I will use this tool for this thing instead of solving the problem. How that's manifesting, I think, for me, trying to work with the government as a new entrant company is you've got to go through very, let's say, procedural steps in how the programs work in order to get your capability into the government. I think there's a lot of success that's happening in getting problem-centered commercial solutions openings via DIU, having now DIU train Navy and other traditional service program of record acquisition offices to buy something that solves the problem rather than do bespoke R&D, come up with a widget that only does one thing. And so I think there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of progress, but the Navy's and the Department of War's stated policies to transform the acquisition space must be pushed into programs and budgets and people and promotion incentives. And that's a generational challenge, and it's not going to happen just because one or two people take over one or two offices, or because the administration changes. I think it's a 1 to 2 decade kind of phase change of the generation of leadership and mid-level managers.
So if you were speaking to the policymaker, like policymakers,
Yeah.
what suggestions would you have? Because some of what you're talking about is maybe culture as much as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I have a lot of feedback when I'm in DC. I think there's a class in business school where it was a comms class, and they're like, you're supposed to ask someone if it's a good time for feedback, and if it's my if it's a friend or someone at work, it's you ask. But with the government, we're all taxpayers. I'm going to give them the feedback, and the feedback is they've got to force implementation down into the front lines, because the policies are like the acquisition transformation strategy makes sense, makes perfect sense. The words are great, actions need to follow through.
Can I piggyback on this?
Yeah.
And I'll take just 2 seconds, because I think one of the things that most of the senior leaders I know wonder, and this started with Hondo Gertz, Admiral Gilday, Admiral Franchetti, I mean, they all sort of went through the same thing, and a lot of guys in NATO this is a technology problem. No, it's a business problem. And what do I mean by that? Because these guys would look at it and say, why can't we do what the Ukrainians are doing? I mean, Hondo Gertz, the old RDA, would be like, I can see all these unmanned things, but I can't get them. And so really what we spent a lot of time when we were doing the Unmanned Task Force was the technology was interesting. We were trying to figure out why OpNav couldn't generate the answer, right? And I'll cut to the chase. It's a standard disruption problem, that if the guys who control the money are N96, the ship guys, N97, the sub guys, and N98, the air guys, and Stewart walks in and said, hey, my buddy Ivan showed me I could put a bomb on a jet ski and go blow it up. Nobody's going to go, whoa, that sounds slightly interesting, so I'm going to give you 10% of my budget to go do this cool thing. No one's going to go do that. So even though it's fairly compelling. And so you had to really realize how the money flowed through the OPNAV and who had decision rights on the money. And that was the big takeaway. So if you look at, Unmanned Task Force, we had tons of ideas, and we were doing it kind of, what you guys were doing is, what's the operational problem? And you get all these guys around, and what's the dingbat way to put a bomb on a jet ski to whatever? And it's an idea that normally people would get thrown out. And we had tons of those ideas, and we'd vet them. But then it's impossible to get money. Of just, could you just shake a couple of shekels out of here, just give us some money? So what you saw with Replicator, Kath Hicks came in, she got about $1 billion, and it started moving forward. And then what you're seeing now is with the dog, we're going to get $60 billion, and that's going to be at OSC. You're starting to see that you have to lubricate the system. It's just not a technology problem; it's a management problem. And do you have money to execute?
And I think Congress is a great audience for explaining here's how your money's going to be spent better, because it is at the end of the day the taxpayers' money and Congress's money, and it's remember back in 2008 when there's a lot of discussion around, how do we fix healthcare? Oh wait, there's 20 different people who have it's a disaggregated buying architecture, right? Of who's paying versus who's getting the care versus the insurance companies versus taxpayers. The DoD is the same thing where there's 20 different stakeholders. And so I think the argument of, hey, we'll spend this money way more effectively, Congress and then a few people over on the budgetary side of the Pentagon are the ones who really hear that argument effectively and then can fence off funds to solve specific problems for you where it's not aligned to, I'm gonna protect my rice bowl.
Well, to that end, for both of you, Saronic had that $240 million acquisition or whatever funding. Do you see that as changing anything, or is there still going to be resistance to,
Well, that's the Replicator money, and that's 2 years ago. That's old news. The Navy only chose to announce it and let them even talk about it in December. I was there at the Reagan Forum. The Navy needs to create actions that prove more good news stories for companies who are doing cool shit, period. And Saronic's done a great job. They've fielded amazing capability, but that's one of the only proof points you can point to, aside from the Palantir Ship OS deal, which was kind of sole source and sketchy and not competitive. So it doesn't really fit in the same category. Where Saronic won the big prime initiative that DIU did, and that's 2 years ago, and it's Kath Hicks' money from the previous administration. So where's the more recent version of that?
And let me jump in. The reason, Task Force V9 gets a lot of attention for the technology, but it's the organizational structure was super important. Yeah. Why? Because Admiral Cooper had leftover OCO funding. I know wanted to be a budget geek, but he had leftover money from the wars that it was in his kitty. And so Task Force V9 initially was $25 million. And so when we walked in and said, hey, and Brasser walked in and said, why don't we go start leasing a bunch of stuff? He had the money to go do it. Then me being in Pentagon, I knew what Cooper was thinking, and I had talked to the CNO sort of outside the N9 organization and explained why they were doing it. And then it was a very top-down driven, hey, give those guys, a couple of dollars. So all that to say is you have to fix that if you're going to innovate.
You predicted, in the future that maybe the Army and the Marines would have a larger role, but do you have any basis for that? Are they clamoring for it, or is there any different culture that is making them want to have a role in that space?
Well, so I remember a meeting seven years ago, the Army came in and said, hey, we're looking at what General Berger's doing. And, when he was the commandant, and he's sort of doing this force redesign, and he's going to be operating off the islands, it's going to be amazing, and we want to be part of that. How are you going to get there? Well, that's a good question. How are you going to target inside the WES? Yeah, that's a sticky wicket. And how are you going to resupply when you're on the island? We're going to get that. And so the idea is now you're seeing the Navy. I don't mean to be disrespectful to the Army. Well, I kind of do, but anyway. But they are now embracing, they're seeing what the Marines are going to go do on the island hopping campaign. And so I see them embracing, and you're seeing some of the young or some of the small USV companies and some of the, are getting
bigger
involved,
ones.
and bigger ones getting involved from the Army of how do you do contested logistics. My point being is that I love my Navy, but I think the Navy is really sort of big Navy, big aircraft carriers, big CVNs, and then small USVs and loitering munitions are just can we just give that to SOCOM or the Army? We'd rather have the big war at sea, the big fleets taking each other on. Now I think some of that's changing, but I didn't hear a lot of excitement on the big Navy, kind of what Ivan alluded to, that this is not, we want to think about ships and aircraft. We don't think about stuff like that.
So I'll flip around, Chris. I think the Marines are hosed because they have no budget, and the budget they do have is controlled by the Navy, which is just very unfortunate for them. The Army, I think, has a very innovative, fast-leaning secretary. I think he's really impressed people. He's got a lot of, let's say, credibility in DC right now. I think they can more directly apply some of the lessons of Ukraine because Ukrainian formations and tactics and capabilities just fit over to our formations more clearly than the naval or Air Force equivalents. That has allowed our guys to have more confidence in their agile and rapid acquisition frameworks. Then when you get to the Navy, though, the Navy has its own problems and needs much bigger platforms like Michael's talking about. And I wrote a piece maybe last year about like why it's harder for the Navy. And I think there are a lot of problems, but I think one of the core problems is half of the stuff the Navy buys is really big and nuclear powered. And so like bigger stuff, look at the battleship program right now, bigger stuff just takes longer to design. There's just more complexity. And you could literally compare a small iPhone and a big iPhone, and the bigger one is harder to design and develop and build. And then the nuclear power question obviously creates a lot of other problems for safety, for regulatory, as it should.
And yeah, just being a historical nerd, I would say too that the Army always does not, or never seems to get quite the credit for the Pacific theater in World War II.
They own the logistics mission in the Pacific.
Logistics.
USRPAC owns it, yeah.
And they also, did as many amphibious assaults as the Marines did.
Exactly.
But, okay, changing topics a little bit. This is for all of the panel. What are the key misperceptions that you find, even in a sophisticated audience, like the participants in the symposium, that they have about autonomous vessels? What should they know that they frequently don't? If you want to start.
I little bit already picked up this topic. First of all, we have to adopt law, especially international law, in terms of development of USV and unmanned system. What's the important part here? What's the main key difference between manned and unmanned vessels in open sea or ocean? If manned vessel captured by Navy, and regardless who is captured, always it's a crew inside, flag inside, and it's possible to trace who is responsible behind this irregular activity. If some irregular activity done with unmanned system, there are no flags, there are no people who can hold any information. All data could be raised, such as it's done like remotely, not autonomous. Probably no even single logs and traces from where this USV has been started, what's the target, what's the routes. It means that global should adopt the rules how to control and take action about legal and illegal USVs in a global scope. I'm 100% sure that Ukraine is not unique in USV development, and probably narco cartels have more experience how to build long-range USV on surface, subsurface, underwater, because their economy is the main driver economy. And I would say the same for us, literally, because our targets is highly priced in compared to USV price. One of examples that submarine kilo, it's like open source prices for 400 million.
The Russians are trying to sell them to everybody else. Yeah.
Not a good advertisement right now.
Yeah, but effectors has been used times less cheaper. Or shadow fleet operations. The average tanker price like 5 million without cargo, something like that. 2 USV is enough to completely shut it down with a price like 200. So it means that, and this is just like direct cost. Thankfully for Libyan rebels, some shit happens in Mediterranean, and nowadays Russians have to avoid Mediterranean for their natural gas logistic. This is like indirect costs. I would say that economics always is a driver, and as soon as navies, your navies, our navies, will start to think through the return of investment, they will achieve more results in innovations, in successful of any operation.
Yeah, I think there's two things I would think about. The first thing, autonomy is a big word. And so I was about 6 months into, I was not an autonomy expert. I'm a poli-sci from the Naval Academy, so why is it and I've got an MBA, and why is this dingbat in charge of autonomy? I think was what people asked and probably still ask. Anyway, but about 6 months into this, as the head of the Unmanned Task Force, I realized that the key to autonomous systems was autonomy. And a lot of people were hand-waving that away, just assuming, yeah, we're going to go build an MUSV or an LUSV and the autonomy will be there. Really? So how many hours has Tesla been doing on their self-driving vehicles, right? Millions and millions. How many hours do you have on this thing that you're doing? About 10? Really? And so number one, everybody thinks about navigational autonomy. Can you see and avoid? Well, the other thing is now you're going to have an autonomous ship. Any SWOs in here? Anybody, any SWO ever go, let's just go 30 days without going down to the engineering plant. Let's just see what happens. You wouldn't go like 30 hours doing that, right? And so that's a really hard problem, number one. So I'm seeing a lot of money flow into this, like, okay, you've got all these startups, it's gonna be a dream. I'm reminded what Jeff Bezos said during the dot-com era is, any idiot can put up a storefront. It's the execution that matters, right? And so will you have the ability to actually do sort of things like HM&E autonomy, the engineering plant? Can you make that thing go for 30, 60 days? And number two, the other thing about, and because Sarah's here, I know she's thinking about this question, the use of lethal autonomy, right? And I think most lawyers would sit there and say you can't use autonomous systems in warfare. And what we did, I don't know if you know Michael Horowitz at Penn, the 3000.9, I think, it was essentially the instruction, when out of the gate, it's like, hey, you can't use autonomous systems. But we realized that if you change things and you bracketed and worked with the instruction, if you scoped it down, you could use autonomous systems for lethality, and I'll just sort of leave it there, that it's not, everybody was out of the gate like, you're going to have killer robots and Terminator on day one. And I was thinking, I have more autonomy in my Roomba than the US Navy does in autonomy. So I don't think we're quite there yet, right? So maybe we'll get there. So I'll leave it there.
And I just want to point out, this weekend there was a lethal accident where a Tesla that was self-driving drove at a high rate of speed through somebody's house. And so, yeah, even in that scenario, yeah, it's not a perfect system.
I'll add just a funny anecdote. So my co-founder Scott actually built the first couple Roombas, and then they got them to production level, and then he went to China and built the next 4 million. And when he first learned about like how the Navy kind of like thinks about software and autonomy, he was like, "Oh, that's all they." He was kind of he like paused and didn't really have anything nice to say. It was great. So the Roombas are smarter still, probably a little bit than some.
We'll see the Ukrainians using Roombas.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll flip it. The thing I think is underappreciated is for manned systems, we actually make them much more complex than they need to be. Often the biggest requirement, think of your 737 airplane, right, that we've all flown on. The life support on that thing is crazy. All the oxygen and pressure and cabin control and the seats. And like, if you strip out the requirements and the life support that are really there to care for the humans, and you just optimize for, I just need a server rack that, even if it's a big, what if it's a quad server rack the size of this table, which is like for my ship, a 1,000-ton ship is about the amount of compute that we've got on board. That's a lot less weight and space. Sure, it needs to be cold, but keeping stuff, 40 degrees is actually pretty easy relative to all the sort of other things you need to do for humans, in a condensed space. It's basically like putting a refrigerator on the inside. The refrigerator will take care of the rest. It's just a lot easier to take care of a computer than a human and a computer, because you're going to need a computer regardless. And so I think that's one thing that people forget is unmanned is actually the base form factor for any machine. And the undersea and the space domains prove that. When we started the space race, right, we sent a satellite up first, and then we sent a dog, and then we sent a monkey, and then we sent a human, because it was way easier to start without humans. And the undersea domain is the exact same. We were doing it before anyone even said the word submarine.
So I've got a series of questions, but I'm also mindful of the time, and I presume that the audience still has some questions. So I'm going to kind of have one last question that I'll offer. CIWAG, I want to focus on the armed group part of the name there and have you guys switch gears and think 10 years from now about the future threat environment. Ron reportedly used drones naval drones in this most recent conflict and has significant stockpiles. And the Houthis, were already using steerable ships crashing into Saudi and Emirati vessels in 2016 and apparently have more modern threats. How big a concern should not only the U.S. and friendly navies, but Western merchant fleets have about rogue actors using naval drones, and what could be done to counter this threat? And maybe we'll start on Austin this time on this end of the table.
Yeah, I'm really worried about it. I mean, I faced Houthis before it was public that was happening. When I went to the Red Sea in that other anecdote, and even with minimal investment, minimal tech, basically strapping like iPhones to surfboards, they were a problem for a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group, right? We're going to have, let's say a decade from, so I hope that the Ukraine-Russia war ends tomorrow and it's a favorable resolution. I want to win also, but the moment a major conflict ends, with that example, you're going to have millions of trained men on both sides with severe PTSD, right? And there's a proliferation of skills and equipment and everything that's going to be out there for a long time, and that's just dangerous, purely, right? Like we can never do to drones the counter-proliferation strategy that we've done to nuclear weapons. They're nowhere near as dangerous, but it's just there's no framework to control it, and it's going to spread, and the threat will never really go away. So the counter-UAS thing, I think is a great market. I think it's a really hard physics problem, but I just lean towards, all right, how do we figure out counter-UAS and how do we create safe airspaces? And I'm worried about asymmetric attacks in the homeland. And I think someone tried to attack the White House last week with that exact mindset, and it was stopped at the last
minute. There was a disrupted, apparently plot. But USVs, UUVs, Michael, what are your thoughts about anything we can do to counter this?
I mean, that's a $1 million question. I mean, I think that, I'm struck by a couple of things that I remember when the Ukrainians started doing their thing, everybody was saying, it doesn't, that's interesting, it works for them, Black Sea, but it doesn't relate to us. And then I saw the Houthis shutting down the Suez Canal, starting to shut down Suez Canal. Oh, well, that's a special use case, that doesn't really relate to us. And then I saw, with all respect to the president, hey, we've taken out the Iranian Navy, Army, whatever, they're down on their knees. Well, Strait of Hormuz is still kind of closed, right? And so what I suspect, if I'm a bad actor, I'm looking at the Straits of Malacca, I'm looking at the Suez Canal, I'm looking at, pick your favorite choke point, and suddenly you realize with a very little effort, you can shut down a very critical choke point. And so I think what you've learned is, man, I'm not sure I need to go try to outspend or outbuild the U.S. Navy, right? I can go spend a hell of a lot less money and have a huge effect. And so that's what I worried about, and I don't know how to really, I think that's going to be the next thing, is how to counter all these things. But I would imagine that's going to be the lasting lesson that everybody is seeing is, again, so I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I mean, you've said that the Russians are very adaptable, and you're probably in a unique position of having to put yourself in their position and think from the defense how they can counter you. But what do you think now, if you were in the Russian position, or down the road when Ukraine is having merchant fleets out at sea, what are some of the steps or things that you might be able to come up with?
It's pretty hard to me to predict far away more than 1 week.
Okay.
We usually not use this scope in our planning. But second one, I completely not want to be on the Russian side. That's something strange for me. But anyway, we have internal discussions, and I already mentioned that Ukrainian warfare, it's something like cat-mouse games. We do something, Russians do countermeasurement. Russian invent something, we do countermeasurement. And it brings us to a unique situation when frontline and current Ukrainian war is more or less technology shooting range, something like that. you can design anything that can be viable on a front line and test it immediately. It brings Ukraine to a unique position of be so fast in development and be on short feedback loop. Something gonna be done today, ended up could be tested in 2 days. But back to the main question, what's the main threats in the future? For sure, post-war time, what we learned from World War I, World War II, post-war time brings a lot of different kinds of problems. If I will speak more or less about Ukrainian, from Ukrainian perspective, for us, main problems that even with everything stopped and all current officers been retired, technology is still available, and a lot of homemade drones could be done just from literally from a paper and some glue. And this is not like a secret. We have a lot of successful story from paper planes. And first of all, what the modern world should consider on how to regulate, but not too tight, such as if you put a lot of limits, it will negotiate like black markets anyway. How to make a deal and prevent all legal stuff could be hacked, such as inside back to home, we completely think that Russian completely hack international law. They know how to avoid sanctions. They know how to supply their technology leakages. And this is like a main threat if international law will not change and adopt for new reality. In 10 years, 20 years, we're gonna be in the same situation, but probably with more advanced technology, more range, and shooting range like 1,000 miles wouldn't be a shooting range. So it would be a kill zone.
I think Ivan, who's in active conflict right now, repeatedly foot stomps this legal issue. So I think Kevin and Sarah are going to have some work to do if they're not already thinking about this as a topic. But
Can I piggyback on what
Yeah.
he said? So I would hate for you guys to walk out of here thinking this is a technology discussion. What I'd really hope for you guys to think about is if you're the Naval War College, what's the lesson you probably should learn? And so let me just editorialize for 1 minute. So I couldn't figure out why in the world we were so bad at innovation. Like, why does this take so long, right? And I don't think my personal opinion is take a look at the U.S. Navy. It hadn't been disrupted since 1942. I mean, so Battle of Midway where, we won, and then you really sort of have a lot of bad habits. I mean, you got 15 times overmatch or whatever Bob Work said. And so we're the biggest game in town. And when was the PBE process constructed? In the 1950s by McNamara. What was going on with Ford Motor Company? They were preeminent. Europe was destroyed, Japan was destroyed. So who was your competition? So what did you focus on? Minimize costs, minimize risk, and don't worry about a 5-year development cycle, right? And so now we're suddenly getting truly disrupted by Japanese, twice as fast at half the cost. I look at the U.S. military as kind of like we're now Ford Motor Company, and the Japanese just showed up in 1979, right? And we're going to sit there and we're going to go at 5-year cycle. Are you kidding me? They're going to kick your butt, right? So U.S. Navy and U.S. military is really getting disrupted. And so how do you operate on the Ukrainian development cycle? I personally think that the lesson you should take away from these guys is, they focus on an operational problem, but their development cycle is insane. And so you focus on the problem, go try it out, it fail fast. We have to really inculcate ourselves to be able to go do that, and we're not used to it. So I think hopefully the Naval War College starts thinking about, can you get with a business school, like how do you teach innovation? Because you can talk about strategy all day long, but if you can't innovate really quickly, forget about it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point too, just on the culture, right? I mean, having worked in the CENTCOM AOR as well as like Indo-PACOM and CENTCOM, we in the interagency were so closely aligned with the Army and the Marines that everything was pretty flat and there was a lot of sharing. A got to Indo-PACOM, and just as an example, I think you're right, you know, they're still in a very World War II model and kind of hierarchy. I was about to get on a military aircraft and they said, oh, well, you have an 06 approval, but because this is less than 2 weeks, you need to get an admiral to sign off on this. So, you know, you're gonna have to fly at cost rather than, you know, get on this military aircraft. Did we save any money? Did we undermine the 06? Like, you know, what was the point? But I think that it's breaking up some of that, you know.
Well, look at Cooper. I mean, so Cooper, we basically pitched him on 59. He's like, you know, let's light this candle, throws a cigarette down, let's go. And you're out there experimenting every single day. Just got a lot of stuff in theater with different companies, different systems, and everything was breaking, but we were learning. We're sitting with the companies, and they were like coding on the spot. And, you know, they're doing stuff in days and hours that would have taken weeks and months, right? And so I think the U.S. military's got to adopt sort of their training development model.
Yeah. So we have about 10 minutes left. I presume that there's some questions out there. I know everyone is also eager to get out of here, but let's just kind of see if we can go around the room. Start in the back there. You.
Hi, I'm Genevieve. I'll wait for the microphone. Sorry. Hi, I'm Genevieve. I have a question. I guess I'd like all three of the panelists' input on this. So all of these capabilities are great, and the theoretical discussions are great, but I think there's I think one major challenge that we have in terms of like development, like RD&D basically, is the hurdles posed by supply chain issues with respect to critical minerals and rare earth elements. And I was just wondering what sort of steps or plans might be taken to mitigate these hurdles. Like, for example, I know that there are some areas that have plans in place for a circular economy to supplement, you know, or to help meet the demand, basically.
Any of you guys want to?
Genevieve, what's your background? Or what are you working on now?
So I spent a little bit of time at the Pentagon, and then I just graduated from the Fletcher School.
Cool.
I studied environmental policy, but I took an special interest in energy and international security.
Okay. And your questions about how critical mineral and other supply chain shortages challenge scalability, but also the R&D cycle.
Yeah.
The way I would answer that is just you got to identify it. So when I was there, the Pentagon talked about this as a really, you know, we really got to think about it, but why don't you map, you know, every operational effect you want to have, what's the weapon or whatever you're going to do, and then just deconstruct it all the way, and then focus on what you've got to focus on instead of talking about it. Just like, what, no kidding, and have a strategy to go after that, whatever that thing is the way I would think about it, because it's a huge risk.
Yeah, I think it's a great question that the critical minerals and supply chain stuff, it doesn't really impact my R&D cycle at all because, well, you can build anything once, right? Especially, like, think of the space race, right? We just need to build it once or some exquisite weapon system once. But what does happen is if you build that thing once without a stable supply chain, then you can't scale it, right? And so, like, it doesn't matter. Like, Office of Naval Research right now is getting hammered, like in the press, by their own boss, by the administration. Everyone's taking turns because they're too used to building exquisite one-offs off of, you know, unobtainium, basically, and then you can't scale it, right? And I can say they've done nothing useful in my medium USV space at all, and they're kind of getting shaken by the neck for it. And so, like, we need to build with scalable components. And, like, that's my biggest lesson from having a co-founder who built 4 million Roombas, is the first couple Roombas he built were built to scale. And so once they got good enough, they could build a lot more very fast.
I think the professor had a question back there. Yeah. You.
So I'm interested in the defense industrial implications of scaling up all sorts of UVs, all types, and integrating with the joint force. So I was interested in the autonomy piece that Mr. Stewart talked about. What types of firms, what characteristics And where are they located, particularly national, that offer the best advantages to link unmanned platforms into this joint force? C2, intelligence fusion, AI, all the kinds of software that will allow the connectivity for the joint force to operate at scale. This is kind of a blue sky question, but I'd like to hear about the kinds of firms and where they are that are able to do this in collaboration.
You know, I think that's being proven right now, right? I think a lot of this is, you know, this is the idea, but I wouldn't say that anybody's figured it out because it's enormously complex. And I think what you have to do is set up the ecosystem to actually do a lot of iteration and a lot of innovation to figure that out. Because I mean, there's certainly guys out there with a lot of great press, and you know they're getting tremendous valuations. But have you proven it, right? And so I think that's part of the problem. What worries me is this is the .com era, and you've got really crazy valuations on some companies. And hopefully there's going to be some due diligence to make sure that this thing actually works before you buy a whole bunch of them, right?
So there's a cool company I used to work at, now a competitor, focused entirely on collaborative autonomy. Just as an example, called Havoc AI. They're right here in Rhode Island. And what was interesting about starting there is they just optimized around that problem. Hey, we're going to solve the collaboration piece between drones. And there's other companies like Anduril's whole thing is built around Lattice, right, to do command and control of many systems. And I think there are many examples you could point to around the United States.
But I think they're going to start working together.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing.
So we're getting down to about the last 5 minutes, so if I can get one or two questions. And
So let's just pull that thread, and I would like to compare the two, on Tom Sass, compare the two, the Ukraine experience versus the projection of how this would work within this US integration, right? In Ukraine, if you have a fast development cycle with this front, does this rapid development cycle ever come to scale? Do you have an overseeing engineering agency like the Naval Sea Systems Command that says yes, no, and what risk it is, and then you integrate into a network that requires you to have an ATO versus the US system where you talk through, how do you get on an ATO with all this, right? Because so far there hasn't been great progress other than the Palantir example of how to cross some silos. So in order to, it's not just implementing fast, or rather it's not just development cycle fast, but it's getting it out and implementing at scale somewhere. And that's what I guess, so simply Ukraine, when you develop fast, do you have to meet certain engineering requirements, or is it just like get it done because you just said it's at the lower tactical units that integrate with the companies?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, first of all. And scale the big challenge in Ukraine in different matters. But based on your question, what's the main rules, let's say rules, or how we decide scale or not scale?
Yeah.
First of all, assets should be good enough. It shouldn't be like perfect, ideal, reliable to be stored 20 years, or what the doctrine said that ammunition should be in safe 25 years, I guess, something like that. In our cases, it should be good enough. It was criteria back to 2023, to 2024. Nowadays, extra one more criteria happens. It should be safe. Safe for guys who make a deal with it. Because most of drones is effectors. They have explosive, and it should be at least safe to not trigger up some sequence of detonation. Yes. After that, as soon as any assets will prove it's powerful and suitable, it can be scaled. I can show up one example, pretty good example, what Ukraine Ministry of Defense faced a couple years ago, the era of FPV drones. You might know small quadrocopters, 8 inches size, 35 kilometer range, 1 kilo of payload. MOD requires Ukraine industry to scale up production of these drones. Everything, all industry start to build up facilities, acquire parts, hire people to do all the stuff. In 9 months, industry deliver the order from MOD. But in 9 months, the gray zone becomes from 30 kilometers to 80 kilometers. And all the drones in the storage becomes unsuitable. And that why, for what's this example? That in active phase of war, it's pretty important to build up, let's say, more modular system than and universal could be adopted or modified or something like that. Time to time, I receive like questions from U.S. Navy. What does it need, or for how fast you can ship to U.S. Navy 6,000 USVs you used in Ukraine? Main question for 6,000 for what? What's the objectives? What's the targets? Because Ukraine all around used at least 1,000 for all the years.
So we are down to the last second, so that was a perfect kind of summary. No worries. I think everyone can agree this is a fascinating panel, and hopefully our panelists will still be willing to stick around a little bit after we close up to answer any further questions. But I want to give Michael last chance to say something.
So I just wanted to, since this is a Naval War College and you've got some recent graduates over here, you always hear that you can't ever achieve anything. It's impossible to do any change. So I just want to leave with this. So this is in 2021. It's in Manama, Bahrain. Admiral Cooper is standing behind me. Michael Brasser standing behind me. And if you look, we're writing the vision statement, and you'll see what I'm writing. By 2025, a coalition of willing allies and partners in the 5th Fleet AOR will utilize manned and unmanned systems and AI to provide requisite capabilities for sufficient, sustainable MDA to protect allies. This was written on, this is before Replicator, this is before Hellscape, this is before, in fact, it's before Russia invaded Ukraine. So for my message to the guys at the War College, you may think you have a crazy idea, but keep on dreaming, because you might be surprised where it ends up if you get the right championship for it. I just want to leave you with that thought.
It was my pleasure to host this panel, and I want to thank everybody for coming. Some of you came at great distance, but even Michael came from being recently in Europe, so thanks so much. Appreciate it.